Where is everyone located? We can review our locational details around the country as the beginning of the recording. So if anyone watches it back, they have something
Hold on to.
to hold on to in these early moments before people start logging in.
Ooh, yeah. So I'm in Utah, West Desert.
Nice. I'm in Los Angeles, about 10 minutes south of LAX, right in the middle.
Nice. Drew's in Las Vegas. Rob is in Oklahoma. And Aaron, you said South Dakota?
North Dakota.
North Dakota. Sorry. So close.
Very close.
What season are you all in North Dakota right now? April. Is it started to warm up or are things starting to sprout?
Yes, we are starting to green up a little bit. So I would say kind of the beginning of spring.
Nice. It's still gloomy here in California. Early spring is.
Ooh. Gloomy.
Yeah, kind of overcast and gloomy for spring in Southern California. June gloom is what people say.
Ooh, coming in on the Q&A, we've got folks from Cordova, Alaska, someone calling in from San Diego, and someone from San Antonio, Texas. That's cool.
Nice.
Good representation. All right. Okay, well, let's get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar today. So we are the Military Lands Working Group, and we're sponsoring this webinar, and we've got a panel of our board members joining us today. Our working group with TWS, so the military, what a lot of folks don't know is that the military owns and manages millions of acres across the country, and those acres come with a unique suite of species that a lot of folks get to manage. So because of the history of land usage and a lot of the military lands has been fenced off historically, we get to manage kind of a greater proportion of the country's threatened and endangered species as well. So the Military Lands Working Group was started with kind of a focus on highlighting the good work that the military does. We would love to invite everybody on the call to join our working group. It's just like any of the other working groups with TWS. You just need to go on the website and click the join button and pay the dues. But you don't have to be a member of the military. You don't have to work on a military base to join us. We have a diversity of folks who have some kind of connection to the military at some point. That are representative on the board currently, but we'd love to have new folks on in our group and your experience. And we're working right now inside our working group to try and brainstorm ways that we can serve, especially during the kind of the trying times that we're in for federal employees right now, too, how we can support our members. So hopefully we'll have lots of resources to bring to y'all. So with that introduction, I would like to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Aaron Pierce is a research wildlife biologist with the USGS with the Northern Prairie Wildlife Research Center. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Aaron.
Thank you very much. So let's share a screen. And there we go. Okay. All right. So, well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction and the ability to be here today with you. I appreciate that. It's nice to be here to talk about some of the work that I and a number of other folks have been doing over the last couple of years. So as a kind of a little quick introduction or more of an introduction, I've been with the USGS for a little over 15 years. I work with waterfowl and other water bird species as a wildlife researcher. And so I've got myself in a whole host of different projects. And as you're going to see from this, one component of my research has been on whooping cranes. And it just so happens that we had some whooping crane and Department of Defense kind of interactions, if you will, or coincided things. And that's going to be kind of the focus of the talk here today. Admittedly, I don't have a lot of knowledge or experience with this particular working group. So, I mean, I can imagine that this may be a little bit different than kind of maybe topics that you generally discuss. But I hope that you find it interesting and of use to you in your work. So let's go ahead and jump right in here. And again, thank everyone for attending this or watching it later on, whatever that may be. So this is going to be a fairly kind of simple structure of the talk. I'm going to talk about some whooping crane basics, and primarily because I never know from audience to audience exactly what everyone's got for some knowledge, and so we kind of need some of that base knowledge to kind of understand a few of the things that are going on. So we'll do that for just a little bit. And then I'm going to talk about 3 different projects. And because I'm going to talk about 3 projects, we're not going to get in any great detail in any particular one. We're going to kind of broad brush them a little bit, tell little stories, and then move on to the next one. So if you have questions, there's certainly a Q&A feature there, and I can answer questions later on. Also, all of these projects are summarized in either reports or in publications that are available to everyone. And there's some, not necessarily links, but ways that you can get to that. That'll be on some of the slides. And then we'll kind of wrap up with some final thoughts. Okay, so kind of jumping right into the first bit here. So whooping cranes are an endangered species. They've been on the list, I guess, almost before there was a list, really. There's been some, concerns about whooping cranes for many years now, decades now. But they're a long-lived bird, and kind of going along with that long-lived nature, they have a slow reproductive rate. So, like your kind of classic species like this, they're sexually mature, fairly late. It takes them a while to kind of start their reproduction cycle. And they usually only rear 1 chick per year. They do lay 2 eggs. Sometimes they can pull off 2 chicks, but a lot of time it's 1 egg's kind of a spare egg. They are monogamous and they mate for life, and they pretty much spend almost all their time together. They co-parent, so they're incubating together, they migrate together, and they spend a lot of time on parental care of their young. So they'll be with their young for about 9 months. So during the first period when they're unable to fly, they'll migrate with them, spend the whole winter together, and even spend most of spring migration together before they finally split off and the parents go to, potentially breed again, and the young becomes independent. Whooping cranes were probably never historically an exceedingly abundant species. I think historically here probably means before European settlement of North America. And this is, through DNA analysis of living birds and other specimens is where they kind of come up with these numbers. And certainly as North America was colonized, the numbers dwindled down into the lows that we see. So 20, a little less than 20 was kind of the population low. As you can see on the map here, whooping cranes were primarily kind of east of the Rocky Mountains. Certainly I'm sure these are fairly spotty records, but this is kind of gives us the idea of where whooping cranes at least used to be historically. Today, and admittedly these numbers maybe are a few years old, but I think we still get the gist of it. The whooping cranes, there's just a singular population that is, sometimes we call it the wild population or the remnant population of whooping cranes. It's called the Aransas wood buffalo population. And that's because they breed in Wood Buffalo National Park. That's in Canada on the border of Alberta and the Northwest Territories. They migrate through the Great Plains twice each year, and they winter at Aransas National Wildlife Refuge, and that's in coastal Texas. And you can see here kind of the numbers. We're talking, maybe 550, 600 as of this year. So usually the Fish and Wildlife Service does a count or a survey every year on the wintering grounds. There are two reintroduction efforts that are going on. One is called the Eastern Migratory, and the other one is a Louisiana population that's non-migratory, because there had been some non-migratory birds that were known in the past. And then the balance of the birds is in captivity. So the captive birds are used to kind of fuel this continued reintroduction efforts, because none of those efforts as of yet has been completely successful, meaning no self-sustaining populations yet. And then, of course, like an insurance policy against extinction. And just one more thing about these reintroduction efforts, and the only reason why I bring it up is because I tend to find that people can have some knowledge about this and then think that all whooping cranes have been reintroduced, and that's certainly not the case. And these efforts are pretty drastic, and they're fairly well known. Actually, one of the ultralights that was used in some of the ultralight training, like it's at the Air and Space Museum in the Smithsonian. So people are usually aware of whooping cranes sometimes through these activities, or as you can see in this picture in the bottom corner, some of the hand rearing that does still go on. But I note that what we're working on is not these reintroduced birds. I mean, these efforts are wonderful, but we're working on the wild population. And again, because those reintroduced efforts have not been completely successful yet, there is always this kind of special concern put on this one remnant wild population that is self-sustaining. And as you can see from this graph here, it has been on a very slow but steady path towards recovery, or at least growth. It's about 4% per year, if you want to calculate it out. And even with the current numbers, or here this is as of 2022, there's still not a lot of whooping cranes, and so that is certainly still a concern for folks. And in kind of understanding, or really trying to support this continued recovery of whooping cranes, folks do a number of different things. And the one thing that I've been a part of is a research effort to do some tracking on the birds. And so we started that in 2010, and it's still going on today. So it's a fairly long-term effort to use these tracker devices. So we mount them on the leg, as you can see in this picture here. And again, if this was 10, 15 years ago, this is pretty exceptional technology. Nowadays, I hate to say, but it's fairly commonplace, right? You see these, they have different configurations and things, but there's a lot of tracking technology that's done nowadays. We get locations while the birds are on the ground. We actually get a different type of locations when the birds are in the air, cellular network. Our earlier transmitters were satellite based and had antennas on them, and these do not, and it kind of allows them to last a little bit longer. So we've been getting about 3 to 5 years out of these transmitters, and sometimes even a little bit longer. And of course, that's the basis of all of the research that I'm going to present today. So whooping cranes are migratory, if I didn't make that clear before. They make about a 2,400 mile journey, again, twice a year. And they can complete that journey in, well, here it says 14 days. We've actually had a few more recently that have done it even shorter, almost like 10 days to complete that journey. But on average, the birds are 11 to 12 weeks overall in migration, and autumn migration is a little bit longer than spring. And during that time, they have to make stops along the way. So they migrate during the day, and then they have to stop. And so the most common stop length is actually only one night. So they could get to a place at about 4 or 5 in the afternoon, leave the next day, let's say 9, 10 in the morning. But they do stop and stay at some places for longer periods of time. Average is about 2 to 4 days. And this is certainly a time when they are potentially kind of vulnerable to different activities. And the distance between stops is averages about 300 kilometers, but it can vary quite a bit. Okay. So last thing is whooping cranes, when they migrate during the day because they use thermals. And so this is a kind of a cross-section view of a whooping crane migration. And it shows, you can kind of see where the points are just kind of look like they're kind of going vertical. And that's them twirling up and rising in thermals, and then setting their wings and gliding and doing that over and over and over again. And so that's why they need to migrate during the day, because that's when thermals are active. And that's in contrast to other or a number of other migratory species that may be waterfowl or passerines, which do at least some, if not all, their migrating at night. All right, so that is the kind of the first bit. So now let's talk about the first project, and that has to do with Air Force operations in Oklahoma. Now, the location here is at and around Salt Plains National Wildlife Refuge, and an adjacent airfield that is near there that's used by the Air Force. So this is a pretty common stopover site for whooping cranes. It's actually identified as critical habitat. We've identified that about 25% on average of whooping cranes stop at this site, and that can be up to 50% in some years. And so I guess the concerns, if you will, are the nearby Air Force Base, Vance Air Force Base, which is south of Enid, Oklahoma. And like I said, this whole area is in northern Oklahoma. Planes take off from there, and this is kind of on some training missions. And these are pilots that are learning how to fly. And they come to this airfield, and they do some landing and takeoffs, and this is just kind of a practice area. So there's not a lot of infrastructure at this site, but it is got this adjacency to this area where there's whooping cranes and, quite honestly, a lot of other birds in this area. So the Air Force is certainly worried about bird strikes, and I am no expert at bird strikes. I want to make that very clear, but certainly the idea of right at takeoff and at landing is kind of a vulnerable time for planes and pilots. Of course, Fish and Wildlife Service is concerned about disturbance and mortality, again, given the adjacency of this area to this major stopover site. So our goal here was just to provide some information, help them develop plans to avoid or at least minimize the conflict with the cranes while still being able to accomplish their training mission. Now, whooping cranes, like I said, they follow like a migration corridor. They're very faithful to the corridor, but not so much to individual sites, except for sites like Salt Plains, which birds tend to go to in high numbers and over again. But as you can see in northern Oklahoma, the blue area is like 50%, is roughly 50% of the whooping cranes that fly through that area. And in northern Oklahoma is certainly the smallest bottleneck, where that's only like about 15-mile wide corridor. So a lot of activity goes through this area. Now, just kind of getting a general sense of kind of where the birds are at in this area. So this is a couple maps that we produced. This is not all the data because it gets a little bit busy, where the points are ground locations, the lines are flight paths. And again, just giving a sense of this kind of overall sense, you see Vance Air Force Base down there, and kind of the lower part of the graphics, and then the airfield and all of the crane activity a little bit to the north and west. And so a lot of the crane activity is more westerly. And I think that was certainly an important first nice understanding of what was going on and what potential risks there actually were. If we can zoom in a little bit, these are only flight locations. And so, and I've zoomed in so far here that we don't really get the very big extreme activity that's to the west of this, but this does give an indication of the times when cranes have flown over and kind of right in the airspace of this airfield. And we also were able to identify some altitude metrics and other things, so that again we could get a sense of what the risks actually were. Zooming back out just a little bit, so this circle is about 25-kilometer radius, and this is only ground locations. Again, just highlighting this idea that most of these locations are definitely to the west of the airfield, but there are a few where there are places where that might be a little bit more in conflict, or potentially create some hazards. And so these would be potentially places that folks would want to go check out, or maybe even look at every now and again and make sure that there aren't actually whooping cranes or other birds there that could be in danger or of danger to the pilots and the aircraft. So that's the where, but the when is certainly as much, or maybe even more important to some degree. So we calculated things like, in this very specific area, when are whooping cranes, when are they arriving, when are they leaving, in both of the seasons. So here these graphics kind of highlight more like when 90% of the cranes are there, but obviously you can kind of use this to calculate any grouping that you want. When is when is 50%, the middle 50% of cranes in the area, or what have you. So it just kind of gives us idea of when the windows of greater potential for encounters are, and when they of course aren't. And then to the right there, certainly for bird strikes, a bird needs to be in the air before it's really there's really a risk involved. And here this gives some indication of when birds are more likely to be in flight during in relation to time of day. I'm not going to really, I won't get into there is some seasonal differences, and there certainly are even some magnitude differences between the seasons, which again, I think can play into when there's, more or less risk even during a day. So the real kind of wrap up here, real quick wrap up here, is that, we quantified the where and the when of the presence of cranes. We hope that gives a general sense of the risks to the people and the birds. Now and we just kind of pass that information off. Like, this is kind of where USGS, at least for this project, ended, where we're giving some objective science and allowing the parties to either discuss their issues or individually try to understand the risks on their own, but giving them all the same information to make those decisions and those assessments. Okay, the second one, which has got some similarities, but a few differences as well, has to do with the Army National Guard in Nebraska. Of course, this is in East Central Nebraska. Now, the National Guard, well, they do a lot of activities, of course, but one thing that the Nebraska Army National Guard does is they fly helicopters, and they fly helicopters at low level. So they're training. They're training at low level with big helicopters. And again, in this part of the world, whooping cranes come through here, and even to the west, a little bit to the west of these activities, there's another critical habitat area. So again, the Fish and Wildlife Service is concerned, and there had been at least one report of these helicopters coming through and harassing or at least flushing whooping cranes. So, not on purpose, but it happened, right? And there was some concern about that. And of course, the Army National Guard needs and wants to be able to complete their training missions. And so our goal here, in similar to the Oklahoman one, is to provide some information so that the Guard can help reduce that disturbance to the cranes, while still, again, being able to complete their mission. So for this case, this was, again, and I'm going to reiterate this again, this is definitely a team effort. So for our part in USGS, we developed this predictive map on the left here. Now, we developed it, I've kind of included the publication here. We developed it for a very different reason than what the National Guard used it for. But we were interested in renewable energy and citing renewable energy, but the product was this kind of relative probability of use map, and that could be used for a number of different purposes. In this case, it was handed off and used by the National Guard, and I guess I should say specifically by researchers at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So I apologize that the graphics color palette changed a little bit. I was kind of putting together old slides for this presentation. But here, and this is just an example, one way to use that would be to say, okay, well, if there's 3 potentially alternative routes or just 3 routes that the helicopters might fly, you can use a map like this to say, which ones have more or less likelihood of encountering cranes, in a relative sense. Well, and that's useful. I think most of what was found is that the Army or the Guard was a little bit less interested in changing their route specifically because they had been set up and they'd worked, they'd spent a lot of time and effort to get specific routes developed. So what the pivot is, okay, on any individual route, where are you more or less likely to encounter cranes? And then that information was used to develop a monitoring program. So the Guard worked with another group called the Platte Basin Time Lapse Project. And they set up in a few locations that were the most likely to encounter cranes. These basically, high-end game cameras, right? I mean, and not to minimize what they are, but that's, in general sense that they are, right? You can call in, you can look at the pictures and you can see if there is, in this case, whooping cranes at the site that you're going to fly over. So in this bigger picture here, that's exactly what happened. So they tended to, or they were going to make a flight, notice that there were whooping cranes right over their flight path in this one area. And, at that point, they could either, since cranes sometimes only spend a day or 2 at a specific site, they could either wait them out or they could either, or divert around the area. But again, no matter what you do, you're minimizing the disturbance, at least trying to find spots where they're more or less likely to be. Another outcome of this, which I think is really also really useful, was they partnered with another NGO for a little bit of behavioral research, but more importantly here for some habitat improvement. So this NGO owns and manages land in South Central Nebraska for whooping cranes. And they, small NGOs like that always need help in maintaining their lands. And so I'm not going to get any real great detail on the type of management that was done. You can see this is the disc, and this is the Platte River, and the river flows are a lot less than they used to be, and so the natural scouring that occurs doesn't occur anymore. And so some of this mechanical work needs to be done, and so this supported that. And so really the idea here was, can we enhance some lands that aren't near where we're going to fly, and so hopefully that might attract cranes to those areas rather than being in the ones where they would potentially be disturbed. Now this whole project, which was spearheaded by Larry Vertiska at the Nebraska National Guard, won an award. We won the 2022 Secretary of the Army Environmental Award. I think it was the Team Award or something like that. So that was, and that was really all him. He really kind of got everyone together and made that happen. And I think that was it was a real interesting experience to be a part of. So the only thing to kind of wrap that up is, again, just saying that, it took someone from the Guard, it took us at the USGS, took Army Corps of Engineers folks, took NGOs like the Crane Trust to make all this happen. But together, we provided protections for the birds, improved migratory habitat, supported the continued missions of the Guard. All right, so the last one is what I've kind of termed collateral benefits of DoD projects. This is really over the whole Great Plains. I think it's probably most important, maybe Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and parts of Texas. So an observation that was made, and we made it in some of our projects and other folks did as well, is that, whooping cranes were using some Army Corps of Engineer reservoirs. Now, there are some military bases and other lands in the Great Plains, but most of the other ones are not necessarily either well placed or even have maybe exactly all the habitats that whooping cranes like. There was a few instances, but really these reservoirs are the main kind of interaction on DoD lands, at least the primary one. And so you can see here a report that was put out by the Army Corps of Engineers a couple of years ago that kind of summarized that work. And so really what our goal was is to provide some insight into the use of those lands and kind of how it fits in the bigger picture. So, you know, the Army Corps folks gave some, you know, basic accounting of what was going on, and we were trying to kind of look a little bit bigger picture and how it all kind of seemed to maybe fit together. So, you know, as whooping cranes migrate, they need, again, to stop periodically along the way. And so I kind of like to think about it as a climbing wall, really, you know, where the hand and footholds are these habitats or habitat kind of complexes of habitats in which they need to kind of move up and down the climbing wall. And so if you've got a lot of them, if you've got a lot of redundancy, you know, that wall is pretty easy to climb, or it's easier to climb. And as you remove them, you know, you've got to reach in and a lot further to make that happen. And then of course, at some point, if you've got a gap in that wall that's so big that you can no longer reach, well, then the whole, you know, the connectivity of the whole system breaks down completely. And that's certainly not something we want to do. And we'll kind of understand, you know, how do the Army Corps of Engineers reservoirs and other reservoirs, honestly, fit in to these hand and footholds. Now, from some of our earlier work, what we found is whooping cranes use a wide variety of surface water as stopover sites. So, you know, we sent some folks out. That's why there's a few people in some of these pictures kind of standing where the whooping crane was standing during one of their nightly roosts. So, you know, anything from a shallowly flooded area in a farm field in North Dakota to the top right there, we've got like a stock pond to the bottom left, a reservoir, and to the bottom right, a river system. And again, a lot of things in between that whooping cranes use. They do like, as you can see from these pictures, they like wide open areas, and they like, you know, where they can see a long ways, and that they you know, helps them. We assume that is more of like kind of a predator response to keep them feeling kind of safe and secure. So what we did was we were looking at how the different types of habitats, how their use changed in relation to drought. And so in this graph, or in this slide here, I show, you know, both small and large impoundments were either resistant to drought, which means that the percentage of use didn't change depending on the drought conditions, or refugio, meaning that it went up. So this one simple graphic here is kind of the best example that we have, but there are some others. So this is in Southern Great Plains. So this would be Oklahoma and Texas only, just for a moment. And it's showing the percentage of use of large reservoirs in non-drought conditions in blue. So 33% of their uses which is still quite high, to be honest with you, even in non-drought conditions. But then you see, as we move from moderate to extreme drought conditions, how much more they have to rely on these large reservoirs. Again, getting up to about 2/3 of the sites that they're at are reservoirs as we get into extreme drought conditions. Now, to this point, I hadn't really said this, but whooping cranes, they like shallow water. So a reservoir is actually a little bit of a head scratcher at first, because they're not sitting out in the middle of this thing just floating around. They're using places where they can wade into the water and you know, basically kind of up to their legs, up to the even middle part of their legs. They don't really like to get all the way, even their you know, breast or anything in the water. So this is one of the sites where we found whooping cranes at during a very a drought period, and as you can see, that this reservoir is drawn down quite a bit, and that's kind of the typical places where they'll use. In this picture, you see kind of an upper end of a reservoir, which for reservoir managers is bad because these areas get silted in, but those silted in areas, and certainly when it's drawn down like this, is kind of wide open, either mud flats or very shallow habitat. And these are places that whooping cranes tend to really like. And those types of habitats are kind of created or available, if you will, especially during drought conditions. So, I guess the first thing that I just say is that it's just kind of, this project is really about kind of giving some due credit to folks that manage reservoirs, Corps of Engineers and others, that these places, even maybe we didn't quite understand exactly how it all fit together, but these places are important for the birds and they are useful to them. Now, like Corps of Engineers or other reservoirs, migratory birds or endangered species, are not probably very high on the list when you think about the multiple objectives that reservoirs function, right? I think about in my part of the world, flood protection is usually kind of one of the main reasons why reservoirs exist. Recreation, and maybe the list goes on why they're there. But what I'd like to say is that really, I think without almost any or very little change in what they do, whooping cranes specifically, are compatible with that. They use these reservoirs when they're available and they're useful to them, and then they use them less when other things are available. So this last comment is that what we really kind of developed with this was this idea of complementary use, in that a reservoir is very useful when it is in a drawn down state. And that's, of course, at the same time when most of the other surface water maybe isn't even available. It's dried up completely. The other side of that coin, a reservoir is at or full or even over full because it's either non-drought conditions or it's wet. Well, that might not be great for whooping cranes, but that's exactly at the same time when other habitats are probably quite available to whooping cranes. So you can kind of get this ebb and flow of when they're useful, and they're kind of useful right at the time when other things are probably less available. And so this became kind of a key idea in identifying important stopover sites, or we're kind of calling them stopover complexes. So it's a place where there's a lot of different types of wetlands with different hydro periods. And of course, some impounded lands can fit into that mix as being, again, very useful for whooping cranes during certain conditions. All right, so we are making our way to the end here. So I hope that what you took from this is that, there can be some positive outcomes, even if there are some initial concerns or maybe even initial conflict. And focusing on those, I think, was important, and just getting this idea that this is something that can be done, and that there is room for DoD operations and whooping cranes or other species probably. The second point here is that when we specifically when we identified a lot of new partners, Army Corps of Engineers, Bureau of Reclamation, there are a lot of people that own and manage reservoirs specifically in other habitats, but it really takes a lot of different people and a lot of different organizations to support recovery of an endangered species, and especially a migratory one that's covering over this considerable area. And I think just kind of acknowledging new people and new potential partners, and even if not asking anything from them, is still I think a great first step. And then finally, I just wanted to say that I think that this is provides this idea that USGS is just providing the objective science here. So in USGS, we do not have, we're not mandated or have no regulatory authorities. We're not mandated to manage or any species, to be quite honest. But our job is to support others in whatever their missions and objectives are. I don't advocate for the species. I advocate for science. And kind of just to kind of hit on that a little bit further. And this was made by my supervisor to really describe things that were going on at my center, but I think it really describes that things are going on in kind of USGS at large, especially our ecosystems mission area, or our ecologists and biologists. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was not initially extremely excited about capturing and marking whooping cranes. Back when we started, there was like 300, 350 of them, right? You capture and mark birds, you've got a chance, you've got a lot of risks. But we had field experience. We had field experience with other species. We had, trained professionals that were on staff, and that allowed us to get in and do this work, to do large scale work. The fact that we did, we do co-production and we collaborate a lot. I hope that's obvious from the talk. And the fact that we can maintain a project for 15 years is, I think, a testament to a system that really does work. And again, it all points to one thing: is doing decision relevant research. And last slide here is just to say, I've droned on about whooping cranes for however long right now, and I sometimes have to catch myself because I get very tunnel vision about a specific species or a single species. And I think, the work that is done, or that I help support, the habitat work or other protections, it supports a lot of other species besides whooping cranes. Whooping cranes are just one water bird among many. And, these are pretty pictures of water birds, but there is lots of other wildlife and plants that are benefited from this. And quite honestly, people are benefited from wetland protections and other habitat protections. So sometimes I have to just catch myself and say, this is more than just single species management. This is about protecting habitats that support a lot of different things, a lot of different natural resources. Okay, so my last thank you is to all of you for your attention. I appreciate it. So I've throughout the talk, I've mentioned different partnerships that we've had on those individual projects. This is a list of, if I hadn't already hit them, of folks that were really instrumental in keeping this telemetry project going for as long as it has. And so, I'm here talking to you today, but I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with a lot of different people. Sometimes they blink in and they blink out, but we've had a lot of people, we've had a lot of sustained effort, and I am exceedingly appreciative of that. So I'm at the end of my talk, and I'm gonna stop sharing, and I guess we'll do what we need to do next.
Thank you so much, Aaron. That was fantastic. I just wanted to kind of echo kind of what Aaron just touched on too, that these projects that he talked about really highlight how partnerships between agencies and organizations with like really very different missions can lead to successful wildlife management outcomes, and they can be really critical, especially moving forward when funding and resources might become scarce for any given entity. I think it's really too important to highlight how successful outcomes such as protecting an endangered species can also benefit the military mission. Speaking as someone who works for the military, because like in this case, military or collision of a bird with an aircraft could mean not just loss of life to a bird that represents a large proportion of a very small population, but also like really costly damage and potentially like loss of personnel life to the military as well. So I think it's really one of the challenges that we face is those that work in conservation with the military is finding where those intersections of interests are, where we can demonstrate that positive wildlife conservation outcomes can be also positive outcomes for the military. So I think that's really great. Thank you, Aaron, for demonstrating that as well. So we are I'm going to introduce real quick our the rest of our military wetlands working group committee. So on this call, we also have Drew White is our military wetlands working group chair. Bristol is our secretary. I'm the treasurer, and we've got Rob as our board member at large. There we go. And I'd like to open up the Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, so we've got one question in the Q&A right now. If you guys have questions, go ahead and type them in the Q&A at the bottom. But we had a question early on in the talk. Aaron, do the cranes migrate singly or in groups? And then one more question to add to that. Are there altitudes where the flights have minimal impact to cranes? Let's see, those on the ground and also to those in flight.
Okay. Well, we'll start with the first one's the easier question. They both. It's more common to see them in groups. What we call like a family group. That would be the two parents or maybe the parents and a young. But that being said, as the population has grown, there's been larger and larger groups observed. I think a couple of years ago, there was like about 100 of them on the Platte River. A year or so ago, I was in Canada, and we went out and saw 30 or 40 of them in one field. So they're starting to congregate in a little bigger groups and doing things that maybe people haven't seen for a long time, simply because the populations are larger than they've ever been. Flight altitudes. Yeah, and I was going to say this while I had that one slide up. Because of the way they migrate, going up into an air column and then making gliding, they kind of fly at all different altitudes. And then certainly when they're on the ground, and let's say I'm on the ground and I'm just going to fly to a wheat field or something a mile away. They're not getting extremely high off the ground. So it's a hard question to answer. I mean, we kind of have a profile of different altitudes that they do fly at, or more or less likely to, but it really can almost be anywhere to some degree.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else have any questions about cranes or work with the military on military bases, or work with wildlife on military bases, or otherwise? Oh, okay. We got some good questions coming in. I don't know, Aaron, can you see the Q&A as well?
I did. I just looked it up. Okay, so I see one about what happens to the transmitters on the crane's legs once the yes. Those transmitters are not meant to fall off, because we don't really want them to kind of half fall off. And so they are kind of meant to be permanent. That being said, we do have observations where they have, for whatever reason, fallen off over time. But and yeah, it's not the best, but it seemed like putting some sort of a fail safe or whatever on them was even maybe a worse idea than something that was more permanent. The transmitters that we did use were actually like a modification of actually a neck collar that is on a goose. So we kind of saw those. We're like, I like that. And then we worked with a manufacturer to kind of reformat it and fix it so that it would fit on a crane's leg. And then how often does the whooping cranes travel with sandhill cranes? I guess I can't give you an exact proportion of the time. Some of the time. So it happens, yes. And especially you'll get like that's a very good situation when you'll get a lone whooping crane that'll be with a lot of sandhill cranes. But it's funny, they call it the halo effect. Like you'll have I don't know, 5,000 sandhill cranes on the ground, and then there'll be kind of a little ring, and then there'll be this one little white whooping crane. It's like they don't want to get too near it or something. It's really kind of sad, if you ask me. But they do fly. Sandhill, again, now we're talking, depends on the season. In the spring, I'll just say sandhill cranes definitely tend to be a little bit earlier than whooping cranes. And whooping cranes are a little bit more spread out in their migration than sandhills. Okay, yeah, and Rich wrote something in here. Yeah, Rich was a part of the Nebraska project, and so I appreciate you being here today. Oh, yes, cases of whooping cranes struck or killed by aircraft. There are a few. I used to know them by heart, but now my brain is not working right now. And it's so random. I think it was like in the 80s near Minot, North Dakota, they had like whooping crane feathers that were on like a tanker aircraft, military aircraft, but not terribly often. But also, that being said, we don't really, we have some instances of whooping crane mortality, but we don't capture them all anyway. Okay, hold on. It's moving on me.
Next question was, what is the best way to determine if flight operations near a busy stopover spot for the whooping crane is representing a hazard to the bird if we have no strike data to reflect the hazard?
Right. Then I think it just becomes a little bit of trying to understand the encounter rates. So it's just that and I'm not like really a risk assessment expert either, to be completely honest with you, but that'd be my guess is I get it. You don't really have a lot of instances, so you don't really know what the real risk is.
I think the next one is asking if one like falls ill or ends up on the ground during a flight, that two may check up on it if you saw this during your research at all.
I guess I'll maybe answer just more generally here. We've had birds that have gotten injured. We've had birds that that die, and when the transmitter still works, we've gone out and either collected mortalities or try to do other things if the bird's been injured. I think in one instance, when in winter, we captured the bird. But like a lot of cases, when a lot of wildlife, maybe you all deal with this. Yesterday, we had people who came to the center with or maybe it was the other day, a day or two ago, with a bucket full of raccoons. So, people kind of have crazy things. The whooping crane, unfortunately, didn't make it. Right, it was sent to the San Antonio Zoo, and then within a few days, it had succumbed. So, wild animals don't do great in captivity. Like, you have to try to capture them. Is there? Oh, New Mexico. Oh, there's a fun little one. Yes, there was a reintroduction effort in. Well, I guess I'm sorry. I was thinking about Idaho for a minute. So, no, there's no whooping cranes in New Mexico to my knowledge. Universities. We're not collaborating directly with any universities right now. I might be missing something over the years that I've forgotten. I apologize if I have.
And Rich also commented, anyone interested in more specifics of the NEARNG, the Air National Guard there, or their experience with Section 7 consultations, or measures taken to improve mission, they can contact Rich or Jake Jung. I'm just combining the two names there, Rich and Jake. Rick now.
Yeah, those guys
anyway,
are great. Those guys are great. And I definitely recommend that. And they were, I'm given just kind of the big happy picture. They were certainly a little bit more in the trenches, and I completely agree with that.
Awesome. Thank you. Reintroduction efforts in Idaho?
Yes, there was an initial reintroduction effort in Idaho. They used sandhill cranes as the surrogate parents. So they would put whooping crane egg in sandhill crane nests, unfortunately imprinting was a problem. So those whooping cranes thought they were sandhill cranes, started mating with other sandhill cranes. Project abandoned. This was decades ago.
Okay, well, let's see. One or two more questions here. Had any of, so I think this question's referring to Chris Crow and the Smithsonian. Any of those zoo efforts, zoo reared chicks ever gotten tagged by your team?
No, when they do reintroduce birds, they do put other transmitters on them, but that's other folks. And so yes, there is a considerable amount of location data on all of the reintroduced birds. And we have even had done a few studies where we've kind of compared some of their movements and habitats.
Okay, last call. Any questions? Thank you. Well, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much, Aaron. This has been fantastic.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, everyone. Have a excellent rest of your Thursday. Oh, and shout out to the International Crane Foundation. Love it.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you later.